What is up, guys? Polk here, and we're back for another episode of Poker Hands, and it's going to be a topical one because we're going to take a hand from the final EPT ever to be played that was won by Jasper Mayen van Putten, but we're going to be looking at a hand between Sam Cohen and David Peters. Let's check it out.
Under the gun.
We're going to be saying the word final a lot today.
Czuczor raises to 280,000.
I can't believe it's the series finale.
Looks like it's been folded to David Peters on the button. He's got a pocket pair, nines.
Yeah. And these are the two biggest stacks?
Yeah, Czuczor is the chip leader. Peters is not that far behind.
I guess that's the good news, is that they don't necessarily have to go to war if things don't get too much coolerier.
While Peters has just called the raise on the button.
Yeah.
In a spot where he is dominated. Sam Cohen with Queen 8. And getting a reasonable price to call out of the big blind and make this a three-way party.
Our hand begins at the final table with Czuczor opening it up under the gun with pocket 10s, and the action folding it to David Peters on the button with pocket 9s. Now, pocket 9s is the kind of hand where against some loose opponents you might want to consider a 3-bet. If you're very deep, you might want to consider a 3-bet. And if you're very shallow, you might consider a 3-bet. But as the two big stacks here at the final table, you want to tread lightly. If David Peters does 3-bet here and his opponent jams, he's going to have a very tough spot and ultimately probably have to fold, which doesn't sound too attractive with a hand as strong as 9. So I like David Peters' decision just to call here and play a little bit of post-flop. The small blind folds. Now Sam Cohen in the big blind has Queen 8 off and definitely getting the odds to call here with a not so great hand, but you know, you're calling 160,000 to win a pot that will be around a million chips, so you don't need much equity in the pot to see a flop. Anyway, she calls, and let's take a flop.
This will be awesome if it just comes queen high now. Queen 8 cracks 9s and 10s.
Define awesome.
More than a million in the middle already. It is a Queen 8 deuce flop. Top 2 for Sam Cohen.
What a great spot for Sam. It's not a super dangerous looking board for each of these players. She's going to be really confident in her hand.
No continuation bet from Czuczor. Action check to David Peters.
She can't even get counterfeited.
Peters with the worst hand. 8% equity bets. 350,000, roughly a third of the pot.
Now, interesting to see what Sam does here, because she may come in for a raise. Two pairs is kind of a vulnerable hand a lot of the time. We can see it's not super vulnerable. There's a flush draw out there, and there are some straight draws. Looks like she is going to come in for a raise.
Yeah, those are the 100K chips.
Can't blame her. I think this gets two folds a lot of the time.
Raises to a million straight, which gets a fold from Czuczor.
I just don't think Sam's going to get too out of line in this spot very often.
The flop comes Queen 8 deuce with 2 hearts, and Cohen flops top 2 to take the lead and goes for the check. Now Czuczor has a decision to make with his pocket 10s. Should he bet and then maybe get some light value from both players, or check and look to maybe play against a bet? Overall, I prefer the check here because if you do bet and face a raise, what do? In fact, if he bets, Cohen's very likely to raise with her top 2, and what does he do facing that raise? He'll probably have to just fold, which puts 10s in a really tough spot. In general, when you have hands like 10s here, you want to be checking because those hands will do badly when facing a check raise. Anyway, Czuczor checks, and the action's now over to David Peters with pocket 9s. He, I think, also should check, but he decides to go ahead and bet a very small amount here, a little less than 1/3 the pot. While I understand what he's trying to do is get some loose value from an 8 or ace high, maybe a hand like pocket 6s, all those kinds of holdings, there's a few problems here with this bet. The version that the big blind can definitely have all of their queens pre-flop because a lot of those hands are going to be calling facing this open, and the player that opened can still have a few hands like tens or jacks, or maybe even a queen, or maybe even the occasional trap. So betting here thin doesn't really make too much sense to me. Also, I think it is relevant that there is a deuce on the board because no one's going to have that card for him to get value from. Maybe this bet makes more sense on a board like Queen 8-7. Anyway, those things said, I don't like this decision to bet, and now the action's over to Cohen. With top 2 here, I like the idea to go for the fast play. Now, you can always mix it up and put the trap in, but there's a few factors that make me like that less here. We're on a 3-way flop, so the chance that the under the gun player comes along as well goes up. And additionally, this is a board where some draws can get there. Now, with top 2, you're not too afraid, especially when you have a heart. So if the flush draw comes on the turn, you have the backdoor flush draw. But at the same time, you want to charge your opponents in case they're bluffing or have a value bet that won't pay off on later streets. I mean, imagine if David Peters bets here with a queen and faces a raise, he's almost certainly going to be calling and look to play across turns and rivers. So I like the decision to go for a fast play here, which she does, and she raises up to 1 million chips. Now Czuczor with pocket tens is being put in a brutal spot. There's a bet and a raise, and both players realistically could have weak hands, but there's not much that you can really do here. In fact, one of the benefits of being able to raise here in the big blind is you do knock out the under the gun player with your bluffs, and when you have value hands, you put them in tough spots. So this is a tough spot for Czuczor, and he decides to let it go, which I'm on board with. Back over to David Peters, and now I think he has a tough spot that he's kind of put himself into. Here's the problem with folding. If you're going to bet nines and fold to a raise, you're going to fold way too much when they check raise you, and you open yourself up to getting bluffed. But if you're going to bet nines and call a raise, you could be drawing to just simply a 9 on the turn if your opponent has a queen or better, which they're going to have often when they decide to raise you. Another big problem with pocket nines is you want them to be bluffing with a hand like Jack 9 or 10-9, and this hand blocks both of those. So a lot of bad reasons to go for the call here with pocket nines. What will Peters decide to do?
Any chance Peters puts her on a heart draw?
It just seems so unnecessary for her to commit this much of her stack on a semi-bluff, but maybe. I mean, I can see the whole card, so that does influence me slightly. He hasn't folded yet, which has me worried.
Carl Parrish has just joined us. See Sam Cohen still running good. Will she be the first American woman to win an EPT? That is correct, Carl. Kai is also rooting for Sam. We need more women in the game. It's the first day of Kai's vacation, so she is able to watch the entire stream today. Some people have taken the day off work, Joe, to watch the last ever EPT.
So obviously David Peters here realizes that her value range is very narrow. She doesn't have queens. Ay-ya.
9 on the turn gives Peters a set.
That's really, really gross. Maybe the heart will save her. Although I guess she does have a heart draw herself now too. She has out to a full house. But man, oh man.
Peters, now a 3-1 favorite.
The turn comes a 9, which happens to be one of the 2 turns of the deck that Sam Cohen needed to avoid here in order to not be way behind in the hand. Now, she did pick up a flush draw as well, which is definitely a little bit more equity she has against all of David Peters' range, but this is a bad scenario. The question becomes, what should she do here with top and middle pair? And I don't really mind either option. The thing about checking is that if David Peters has a hand like tens or jacks or jack 9 or 10-9, or even a hand with a high heart in it, she allows him an opportunity to try and draw out on her with his pair. If she jams, though, the problem is that if David Peters calls her, she's likely in a bad spot. In fact, if David Peters calls, the only hands she can reasonably expect to beat are maybe a hand like ace-queen or king-queen with a heart. So both options do suck. However, I'm kind of leaning towards jam here. By jamming, you do deny your opponent off some equity, which helps out a bunch, and you're still ahead of their range here on the turn. So when there's about pot size left in a tournament and you have a strong hand, oftentimes you just have to go with it, because if you win that pot, it's very important, and if it goes check, check, and your opponent improves over you, it is devastating. So I'd like to see her make a move here that will not work. Let's see what she does.
$3 million in the middle. Sam with just over 3 million in her stack.
Talked about a lot of good stories at this final table. I think Sam's would be the best.
All in.
She shoves the turn.
Oh boy.
And David Peters calls.
Oh boy.
Sam Cohen at risk and looking for a queen or a heart on the river. 10 outs.
Drawing thin, but not super thin. 1 in 4 times she gets there.
What's hand doing?
Unless it's a queen or a heart on the river, we lose a player. It is not a queen, it is not a heart. Sam Cohen departs in 6th place.
Wow, that's just so unlucky.
Cashing for 145,900 euros, taking us down to 5 players, and David Peters reclaims the chip lead that he's held for so much of this tournament, up to nearly 14 million in chips, 13.4 million to be precise. More than 110 big blinds for Peters.
Also winning a title at the EPT was William Kassouf, and tomorrow, in celebration of his 10,000 euro high roller victory, we're going to be doing a William Kassouf Poker Hands episode, so stay tuned tomorrow. Oh, also guys, if you've not gotten a chance, subscribe to the channel. Be part of the team.